Today we are looking at the question, do plants have souls, as we examine the nature of nature. Now, we just did a video about the nature of the soul. We're going to look into this even more now and figure out if plants have souls, because there's a lot of interesting questions. I think some people would be like, well, if plants have souls, doesn't that mean that being vegan is causing plants to feel pain and suffer and all this sort of thing? So we're going to be taking a look into a lot of the nature of nature, like I said, and the nature of the soul, and what this has to do with reality and existence and what it implies to us, because it's not just about plants, it's about the nature of reality and how reality operates. But looking at plants is a really good, interesting case in point, because it really walks that line between, well, does it have a soul or doesn't? And if not, how does it work? If it does, how does it work, etc.? It's a really interesting thing to think about. So that's what we're going to do today. And to do that, we're going to be taking a look as well, as usual, on mindmatters.ai, a great website that I highly recommend. They always have fantastic, really interesting articles. And this one is called Are Plants Cognitive Intelligent Organisms? And so we're going to be taking, oh, it's by Denise O'Leary. That's cool. I like Denise. All the articles that not all, but a large number of the articles we read are by Denise O'Leary. I wonder if I wonder if she's Christian, because I know that Michael Egnor is Christian, and it's interesting because they're very, like, Michael Egnor is Christian, but also a idealist, or at least a panpsychist. Anyway, doesn't matter. I like Denise's articles very much, and I like Michael Egnor's work very much, despite my disagreements on religious stances. So anyway, it says, as panpsychism, the idea that all life forms are conscious, takes hold in science, it ruffles some fields more than others. Think of what it's doing to botany. And this is interesting, and we've talked about this before recently. I think in the last, not the live stream we just did, but the last week's live stream, I think we talked about how panpsychism is starting to enter into the mainstream scientific narrative. And of course, panpsychism being the idea that all reality is conscious to some degree. And we talked about how our system is similar to panpsychism, but differs. Panpsychism, I won't get into all that now. It's good that science is taking a step closer, but still not going far enough. But anyway, there is this idea in science going around, panpsychism, that consciousness may be a fundamental attribute to existence. And this opens up interesting questions like, well, what does this have to do with plants if everything is conscious and to some degree? And I'm not going to get into the qualms of defining consciousness and everything right now, but anyway. Heidelberg put out a media release this week warning that the belief that plants do things we commonly associate with animals is straying beyond the science. So this is a quote from Heidelberg University. It says, plants are often attributed with abilities similar to those known in the animal or human world. Trees are said to have feelings and can purportedly care for their offspring like mothers. And just to be clear, this quote is criticizing this view. They're not supporting it. They're criticizing it. In an article in the review journals, Trends in Plant Science, 32 international plant and forest researchers followed up on such assertions. Led by Professor David G. Robinson, Professor Emeritus for Cell Biology at the Center of Organismal Studies of Heidelberg University, the researchers analyzed the claims in two popular publications on forests and reached the conclusion that conjecture is equated with fact. They warn against anthropomorphizing plants. All right, so far, this quote is arguing against plants having these qualities. It says, but such claims are not made only in popular literature. Professor Robinson and some of his colleagues have expressed concern on this topic before. In 2020, EMBO Reports published a paper by František Beluska and colleagues titled Plants, Climate, and Humans, Plant Intelligence Changes Everything, from the paper's abstract. And this is a quote from the paper. However, over the past decades, plant science has revealed that higher plants are much more than just passive carbon-fixing entities. They possess a plant-specific intelligence, which with they can manipulate both their abiotic and biotic environment, which includes climate patterns and whole ecosystems. Considering plants as active and intelligent agents has therefore profound consequences, not just for future climate scenarios, but also for understanding mankind's role and position within the Earth's biosphere. Let's see. So then there's another quote. It seems like there's, so basically this quote now is another quote criticizing it. Let me see where this is going here. Attempts to humanize plants may be in line with current trends towards rampant anthropomorphism in biology, but that paints a highly distorted picture of plant life. Let's see. They're basically criticizing, saying things like a new view of higher plants as cognitive and intelligent organisms that actively manipulate their environment, appeal to psychological and neurobiological concepts of social cognition without providing empirical basis for such a far-reaching proposal. So there are critics, of course. So basically on one side you have scientists who are going, hey, it looks like that we have plants that are exhibiting some kind of intelligence and organization. And then other scientists who are criticizing, saying you're going too far by attributing some sort of like anything that could be comparable to human properties. But they responded to that, which is interesting. Let's see. So they responded to the criticism. Let's see what they said. We have always been well disposed towards criticism. By studying cognition in plants, we expect it. But we do not believe that dogmatic attitudes can be helpful for science to progress. Very true. If Robertson et al. Want to continue their claim that 85% of Earth biomass, plants, is made up of organic, semi-living machines, and that intelligence is a gift belonging to only 0.3% of life, animals, they are obviously free to believe it, but they should support their claims with scientific evidence. Let's see. Incidentally, František Beluska is part of the third way of evolution group, which seeks to look beyond Darwinian natural selection in order to understand evolution. That may be underlying the source of tension because Robinson stressed their critical letter that most ecologists understand that ecology strategy is a misleading teleological shorthand for evolved adaptable behavior determined by natural selection. Okay. All right. So let's unpack this because we have, there's a little bit more, but I want to actually comment on what they're saying. So you have some scientists that are saying, hey, it looks like that plants are behaving in intelligent and organizational ways. That point to some inner life. And then you have other scientists who are saying this is not factual, this is not scientific at all, you can't back this up. And they're replying to this saying, hey, we understand we're going to get criticized, but you're basically being dogmatic because you can't back up anything that you're saying either. And we believe in our position based on the facts that we've been studying. So, you know, people arguing back and forth. And the position that plants that do have an inner life, is supported by this individual who's also part of an evolution group that seeks to go beyond Darwinian natural selection in order to understand evolution. Okay, so this is what's very interesting is that, so we also go beyond Darwinian natural selection in order to understand evolution. Darwinian natural selection plays a part in evolution, in our conception of it, but we also have a teleological conception of evolution as well. So Darwinian evolution is reliant on random mutation and natural selection. This is how Darwinian evolution works. And remember, anytime you hear the word random in science, it means they don't have a clue how it works, because randomness is not an explanation, it's a non-explanation. Randomness is literally the absence of rationality. Something that happens randomly is something that happens for no reason, for no cause, with no cause. if it had a certain reason or cause, it wouldn't be random. There would be some rule or property that made it the way that it was rather than another way. So science appeals to randomness into a multiplicity of areas, areas. In the Big Bang, with regard to quantum mechanics and evolution. Big Bang is related to the quantum mechanical position. So quantum mechanics and evolution. So they say that in Darwinian natural selection, that a random mutation occurs. So somehow a mutation occurs. How? I don't know. Somehow a mutation occurs. And then natural selection takes over where, well, if that random mutation serves as an advantage, then that will continue to propagate and spread genes. Whereas if the mutation is not conducive for propagating survival, then it will die out and not get passed on. So, of course, we go beyond this, right? First of all, we know that there's no such thing as random mutation, and we know that natural selection plays a part, but it's also more than that. So in our position, reality is a self-solving, evolving system. Reality is a system that is alive, and it is alive in a mental aspect as well as a physical aspect. So reality is a system of transforming, self-evolving mathematical patterns, and this gets reflected in the world in that it is instantiated in a way that results in evolutionary adaptions. So adaptions occur not because of random mutation, but rather because of mathematical systems seeking more optimal patterns. So it's done explicitly rather than randomly. And natural selection can play a role in this, of course, because if it is something that is adaptable, then that species will survive and propagate. But it's teleological rather than being random, which is funny. Science is so weird. It when we think of how strange religion is, science is also very strange. They would rather have randomness than teleology, and teleology means purpose. So something evolves for a purpose rather than randomly. And it's so strange because randomness is literally the lack of explanation. And the scientists would rather go with randomness than saying that, oh, well, there's a purposeful element to existence. And the reason why is because, it has to do with dogma, because they believe that if they admit to teleology, then they have to believe in God, because, oh, well, what causes the purpose? It must be God that runs that purpose. And so it's just dogma that they reject this idea. But it's just so, I don't know, humanity is so strange, because it's like, just because you accept teleology doesn't mean you automatically have to select, you have to believe in a creator God, which a lot of people do, which is kind of, case in point, Michael Egnor, which I mentioned earlier, the neuroscientist, and Denise O'Leary, I think, works with him, or what does she have to do with him? She worked on a book with him, or something like that. I don't know. She is somehow involved with Michael Egnor, which is cool, and I like Michael Egnor, and I like Denise, but this idea that when Michael Egnor realized that reality must be mental, he went to a religious faith in God, which is just, it's so, you don't have to do that. You don't have to, just because reality is mental doesn't mean ipso facto that there is a God, at least not in a creator sense. Yes, there is a self-grounding, necessary and eternal ground to existence. There has to be, there must be. And if we want to call that God, we can, but that doesn't imply a creator God. In our system, that's what we are. As systems of eternal necessary mathematical frequencies. So it's interesting, nonetheless. So anyway, you have this back and forth with plants. So what about our system? So remember, in our system, we're all eternal minds. We are zetas. We are eternal systems of frequencies, and we link to these bodies, which are avatars, which allow us to localize and experience in the space-time domain. So you are a zeta, you're not your body just lets you get around. What you actually are is an eternal mind, eternal being of frequency, a Zedic mind. So the question is, do plants have souls, or are plants souled? Do plants have a Zedic mind associated with them? And this is actually very nuanced. There's a couple different ways that we could look at this. Either a plant does have a Zedic mind associated with it, and thus has a soul, or it is a collection of souls, or it is doesn't actually have a soul, but is a thought pattern. So let me explain each of these. First of all, if a certain plant simply is associated with a Zedic mind, a Zeta, a soul, that's pretty easy to understand. It would be very similar to us, where we have a body and a soul. A soul is using that avatar to experience the world. It would be using that plant to experience the world. There are a couple of issues with this that we would need to look into. For example, plants are not as delineated as avatars. Avatars are very, very delineated. Like there's a start and a stopping point to it and an end to it. Whereas plants, like for example, you can take you can take cuttings from plants. You can take cuttings from plants and propagate them. And this introduces, well, okay, so if you're taking plants and propagating them, what does that mean in terms of the soul? Is that soul now going to be connected to every single plant propagation that one is doing? Or is there a new soul link to every plant you start to propagate? If so, when does that occur? When does that not occur? So it seems like it would be it's possible that a plant has a Zedic mind linked to it, but it does introduce some questions that we would want to study and examine. And then there is the idea that a plant could be a collection of souls, which is a really interesting idea. And I want to say, I know that there were a couple philosophers that had an idea similar to this, and I can't remember who it is. And if someone knows, let me know. But I think that a philosopher named Gustav Fechner had this idea as well, whereas you could almost think of the soul, or if there's a multiplicity of souls associated with the plant, it would almost be like, hold on, I'm losing the article I had. Where did the article go? Oh, here it is. Okay, so the idea would be that it's more like a collective or a community that operates like as a like a kind of the philosopher compared it to a communism, where you have a multiplicity of minds that are sort of involved in this communist sort of multiplicative entity, which is an interesting idea and would answer certain questions, like the idea of propagation would be, well, there's probably a certain portion of souls that are affecting different areas or different parts, and so since you had a separation of that unitary entity into a multiplicity of entities, well, that doesn't really pose a problem because you already had a multiplicity of entities associated with it. And then, of course, you have the idea that it's possible that a plant actually doesn't have a mind associated with it, but is a thought form. And so the difference with this is for example, if you go to sleep and dream at night, you have dream characters in your dream. You have people that are walking around, but those people in your dreams, they don't have souls. There's no Zedic mind associated with them, but they're still a very complex function that is a product of your mind. So in the holos, which is a collective result, if plants had no soul associated, they would still be a thought form, in that this is why they would exhibit, they would still exhibit lifelike qualities, because they're still composed of frequencies that are tied to minds. So in other words, it would be the Zedic collective that sort of unconsciously controls plants. So they would be alive in a sense, but they wouldn't be tied to a specific group of minds or a singular mind. It would be a product of all our thoughts coming together and being this thought entity that, of course, still exhibits lifelike behavior because it is it comes from us. It is our expression, our thoughts, etc. So this is really interesting ideas, and I think that one could make good arguments for all these different cases, and I think that it's something that we really need to study and take a look at. I am inclined to think that plants do have an inner life. I would be more inclined to think that plants do have an inner life rather than just being a collective thought form, because of the properties that they do exhibit. Even though it's not necessarily that it couldn't, it would still seem to be enough stimulus that a Zedic mind could be able to perhaps link to it. So I think that plants are a really good boundary state where I think that there's multiple things that could possibly be going on. I think that whatever it is, I don't think that it is as straightforward. Not that any of it is straightforward, but I don't think it is as straightforward as our experience, where we have a singular Zedic mind that has a consistent localized experience. With this, of course, it gets more complex, like the idea with I said about propagation and etc. So, but I would be inclined to think that plants do have an inner life. I think that that is true. Do I know that for sure? No, I don't know it for sure. It could be a thought form, and there's arguments that could be said that it could be a thought form, a collective thought controlled by the Zedic collective. But I think that plants do have an inner life. That would be my inclination. So this raises a question, because some people like to bring this against vegans, and they're like, oh, well, if plants have an inner life, if they have a soul, then well, you're eating plants, like might as well eat animals too. And so there's a big difference here. So I just want to point this out. Remember, you don't have to be a vegan to be neogenian, but we do support that position very much, and at least at least understand why we support that and promote that. And so the idea is we want to reduce unnecessary suffering in the world. And so what we do is we look at a capacity for a being to suffer. A human has a much higher capacity to suffer than an animal. An animal can suffer a great deal, but a human can suffer more. And some people might think, well, that's not fair. What do you mean? We can all suffer the same. No, that's not true. And this is where some people try and be like, oh, well, we're humans are equal to animals. And that's not true. Animals and humans are different. We are all Zedic minds linked to different avatars, but the avatar functionality is different and leads to different types of experiences. Humans have much more complex experiences than animals. So animals can suffer a great deal, but they don't have sophisticated planning abilities, which means they don't suffer, for example, like humans can plan ahead. They can have anxiety about thinking about, what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. You can get into all sorts of kinds of psychological torture with humans that you can't with animals, meaning that humans, because of their cognitive capacities, they have a much higher capacity for suffering. Animals have a lower capacity for suffering, but still a great deal of suffering, which is why we want to reduce unnecessary suffering, because why should we subject minds? Like, imagine if you were an animal. Do you really want to be, forcibly impregnated, have your child ripped away from you, be confined into a tiny box and your neck split open? Like, it's terrible. It's terrible. Like, animals are basically tortured. And it's terrible, and that's unnecessary suffering. Now, when it comes to a plant, plants have, let's say that a plant does have an inner life. Let's say there is a Zedic mind associated with it. Well, due to the avatar that is providing the link to that Zedic mind, which would be a plant in this case, that plant avatar, due to the signals that it is sending to the Zedic mind and the experience that it's having, the capacity for suffering is much lower than in animals. It doesn't have the same kind of nervous system or nerves, which means that its capacity for pain. Like, we can't say that it doesn't feel pain because we don't know what it is like to be a plant, but we know that it's very likely much significantly less than in animals. Plants' capacities are significantly less than in animals, and their capacity for suffering is significantly less than animals. So, so does eating plants introduce some amount of suffering? Maybe it does. Maybe there is some amount of suffering that a plant has when you pluck it, rip its roots out from the ground. Maybe there is some amount of suffering associated with that. However, that amount of suffering is much less than the capacity for an animal that the capacity an animal has to suffer, which is less than the capacity that a human has to suffer. So we want to reduce unnecessary suffering in the world, and we want to do that as much as possible. So we want to make sure that animals are cared for, because we love and care for animals. We love and care for plants as well, but hey, we have to eat, and until we develop the ability to sustain ourselves just by absorbing light, there's no way to get around this, and that's fine, because it's very likely that the capacity for suffering of a plant is minuscule. Plants don't know what's going on. We don't know what it's like to be a plant, but it's very, very, very minuscule. So my point is that some people think, oh, well, if plants have inner life, you're going to have to face all these ethical questions. And it's like, there really aren't very big ethical questions that come with a plant having an inner life. You just have to look at a being's capacity for suffering and make rational decisions based on that. So I think that that's a very important thing to keep in mind. But in general, it's a very interesting idea, and it's very cool how plants do seem to exhibit, the positive responses to emotional tones and forms of intelligence and organization. It's very cool. Plants do seem to possess a possible inner life, and our system accommodates that perfectly well. There's no problem with that in our system. There's no reason being that a Zedic mind could not link to a plant avatar unless that system is not sophisticated enough yet to establish a link. And questions like that are questions that we need to answer. We don't know at what level an entity sophistication needs to be at for a Zedic mind to be able to interface with it. But based on what we know about plants, based on what we know about the mathematical nature of reality, I think that it is likely that plants do have an inner life and in some way have a soul or souls associated with them. I would think more inclined to be, one way or the other. So that's and so this also says, to read the end of this article here. It says, an underlying issue is, of course, the fact that the Darwinian concept of nature doesn't even credit humans with actual intelligence. We merely have evolved adaptive behavior determined by natural selection. In other words, natural selection, acting on random mutations, is thought to account for abstract mathematics and all spiritual teachings on the theory that they enable their creators and admirers to spread their selfish genes. Of course, it may be untenable that plants plan or think, but honestly, Darwinism is untenable too. Will this controversy become a war of untenables? So yeah, I don't believe that plants plan. Do plants think? It depends what you mean by think. I think they mean consciously think. No, plants do not consciously plan. Plants do not consciously think. But if it's associated with a Zedic mind, it does think. And thinking in terms of a Zedic mind can happen unconsciously. That's just the varying combinations of its internal sinusoidal patterns. So it's just a transformation of patterns, a transformation of a wave function, a transformation of data. It doesn't require an ego or an explicit identification or realization of I or anything like that. So let's see. Researchers from Tel Aviv University have recorded high-pitched airborne noises emitted by water-stressed plants The noises could be interpreted as an indication that plants cry out for help. Please water me, much like a distressed animal would. Oh man, now I feel bad about my plants that need water. Most of my plants are well watered. They're not droopy or anything, but some of them are a little dry. I need to go water them so they're not screeching. In their study, the researchers suggest that whenever a plant is cut or suffers from an infection or is under stress, it repeatedly emits a click sound. Humans are not able to hear these clicks because their frequency is above the audible range. How interesting. I wonder if that is true. I don't know anything about this study. It's from Plants Scream Under Stress. Here's how you can hear them. That's fascinating. Let's check that out. I wonder what a plant scream sounds like. A series of clicks, apparently, huh? Oh, is there a way for us to hear a plant scream? That would have been a good title for the video. Is there a way for us to hear a plant scream? Researchers recorded the clicks produced by a stressed plant in an acoustic chamber and in a greenhouse setting with the help of ultrasonic microphones. The study authors recorded sounds emitted by wheat, corn, cactus, tomato, and tobacco plants under different conditions, both when they were stressed and healthy. Huh. They noticed that when plants were healthy, they clicked rarely, but in a stressful condition, they clicked multiple times. How cool. That's cool. I like that. I think that's really cool. That's awesome. I want to read this more. Oh God, do you see the amount of goddamn pop-ups? It's crazy. Half the time when I open up articles, I'm just like, fuck it. I'm not going to read this article because so many ads are overlaid. By the time the article turns out to be like this tiny little sliver that I can barely see. And then it's constantly, oh, hey, here's a coupon. Oh, hey, sign up for this. Then a video starts playing. Oh, my God. Like, look, no thanks to this. It's grayed out for some reason. Do I want to get smart? No. Close this out. Big ass toothbrush on the side here. Some clothes. Jeez. Can you imagine? This is capitalism. This is what's going to happen when we all have eye implants that project in our smartphone data and everything overlaid on the world. We're going to have we're barely going to see reality because we're going to be having pop-ups popping up all over the place, having to pay for premium content just to be able to see in color. It says we cannot say that plants feel stress and therefore make sounds. It might be the sounds are made completely passively, like a physical process. Yeah, so they're saying that they can't know for sure that just because they make sounds, it means that they feel stress. It might just be a physical process that does that. But that sounds very similar to Descartes' argument. So Descartes didn't think that animals had souls. So Descartes basically kind of said the same thing. Whereas, well, just because an animal yelps doesn't mean that it actually has an experience or a soul. He says that the screams of an animal can be likened to the sound of grinding gears. So kind of like, an animal yelping isn't really because it's in pain. It would be like a machine that's the gears are getting stuck, and so it makes a noise. So basically saying like just because an animal yelps doesn't mean it actually has a mind or a soul. It's just an automata. But of course, we very much support the idea that animals do have souls and feelings and emotions and can feel. And so we want to protect them and care for them as much as we possibly can. So this is interesting. And so like I said, I would be very much inclined to think that plants do have souls. My opinion is that plants do have souls. They do have Zedic minds associated with them. It just opens up questions like propagation, etc. Plants aren't as delineated or demarcated as an animal or a human. They're a little more fluid in their boundaries and in their propagating mechanism. So interesting, very, very interesting thing to think about. Ultimately, yes, I do believe that plants have souls, and which is why we really need to be conscious of taking care of our earth. Doesn't mean we shouldn't eat plants. We need to eat plants because their capacity to suffer is probably very, very small. Definitely so with regard to an animal. But anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I found this article fascinating. I actually would like to look into this more. I want to hear the click sounds it makes, actually. But yeah, this has been a members only video. I release one members only video to the public every month. So maybe you'll see this, maybe you won't. I don't know. But I want to give a shout out to everyone who does support, especially Renaissance Siri, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Enki, Nuzalina, Paul Rogers, Eric Fire, Masam, Christopher, and everyone else. Thank you very much.